In the quiet heart of the village, where the river curved like a smile of the earth, there lived a woman whose words breathed like living things. Her name was Amara. She was slender and soft-spoken, but when she wrote, her spirit burned brighter than the sun that touched the rooftops of their thatched huts each morning. Few in her world could read or write, yet Amara had learned from an old traveler who once passed through the village when she was a girl. He had taught her that words could trap time, that ink was a mirror for the soul. Since then she had written every day, her thoughts flowing like the river that fed their land. The villagers often said her ink was touched by the ancestors. They whispered that when Amara wrote, she didn't just use words, she wove truth itself into the lines. Her letters were never sent. They were folded, tied with thread, and tucked away in a carved wooden box by the hearth, hidden beneath a small cloth of woven gold. Sometimes she wrote to her future self, sometimes to her unborn children, and other times to the spirits who guided the wind. Her writing was her way of breathing beyond her body. Then came Okoro, the hunter whose name carried both strength and pride. He was tall, with eyes like the deep forest, and his reputation reached far beyond the village borders. He brought home lion pelts, antelope horns, and stories of near-death triumphs. When he first saw Amara, she was by the river, her fingers stained with ink, her eyes fixed on a page fluttering in the breeze. Okoro had never known a woman who could make silence look so alive. He asked for her hand within a moon's turn, and her parents, proud of such a match, agreed without question. Their wedding was bright and filled with drums that echoed through the valley. Okoro smiled often that day, calling her his moon, his peace. Yet even as he lifted her veil beneath the sacred baobab tree, a small unease stirred in him. He saw the smudge of ink on her palm, and it unsettled him. Later that night, when she sat before the fire, pen in hand, he asked softly, "What could a woman need to say that her husband cannot?" Amara smiled, her face glowing in the firelight. "Words are not always for others, Okoro," she said gently. "Sometimes they are for the soul that cannot speak aloud." Okoro laughed then, but something in her calm answer dug into his pride. To him, words were air, useful but invisible. To her, they were eternal. As seasons passed, Amara's letters grew more and more frequent. She wrote of rain and harvests, of love and longing, of the way light moved across Okoro's face when he returned from the forest. She even wrote of her fears, how silence felt heavier each day, how the women in the village no longer spoke freely, and how she dreamed of a time when every voice could be heard like wind through the reeds. She poured herself into her ink until her fingertips were dark and her heart lighter. At night, when Okoro came home, he would find her bent over her parchment, candlelight flickering against her cheekbones. Sometimes, he would stand in the doorway watching her, unable to understand how a woman could find joy in such stillness. She did not weave baskets like the others, nor did she spend her evenings gossiping by the fires. Her world was built from words and he did not belong to it. The villagers adored Amara, though they half feared her gift. Children would peek through her window, hoping to see the magic of her hand moving across the page. The elders said her ink carried whispers of truth, that the ancestors listened through her. But some of the men began to mutter. Too much learning, they said, made a woman restless. And Okoro, hearing them, began to feel the weight of their words pressing on his pride. Still, when she smiled, his anger faded. There was a warmth about her that could turn even silence golden. She would press his hand to her cheek and say, "Do not fear my words, Okoro. They are part of my breath." Yet one evening, as she sealed another letter, he caught her murmuring softly, "Truth, even when burned, rises again in smoke." The phrase lingered in his ears like a curse. He turned to her, his voice low and uneasy. "What truth needs to rise from smoke? What are you hiding in those papers of yours?" Amara looked at him then, her eyes steady and sad. "Only the truth of what I see and what I feel," she said. The candlelight trembled between them. Its small flame danced upon her ink-stained fingers, turning them into sparks of living fire. In that glow, she looked both fragile and infinite, like a woman made of light and memory. Outside, the night was deep and still. The stars seemed to lean closer, as though even they wished to read her words. And somewhere in the quiet, a faint wind stirred through the open window, carrying the scent of smoke, as if whispering a warning of what was yet to come. When the rains finally came and the earth began to smell of new life, Amara knew she carried a child within her. Her hands trembled as she touched her belly, and a quiet joy filled her heart like morning light slipping through the cracks of a hut's roof. She told Okoro with a smile that outshone the dawn, but though he lifted her in his arms and laughed, something guarded lingered in his eyes. Fatherhood was power to him, and power demanded control. He began to speak differently, softer at first but firmer too. He told her she must rest, that she should write less, that her words might bring unwanted spirits near their unborn child. Amara obeyed for a time, though her fingers itched for her pen each night. When Okoro went hunting, she would take out her papers, spreading them like petals around her. She wrote of the child's heartbeat she thought she could already feel, of the wind that sang through the reeds, of her hopes that her child would inherit her voice, the one gift she feared might fade when she was gone. She sealed each letter with care and hid them in her wooden box, where the ancestors' carvings seemed to guard them with silent pride. But in the village, whispers began to grow like weeds after rain. Some said the reason Amara wrote was not for her child but for another man, a spirit lover, invisible yet near. The old women said her writing was not natural, that no woman who spoke to the dead could bring peace into a home. Others claimed her ink contained charms, and that her husband's silence was proof she ruled him through words. The rumors reached Okoro like poison in sweet wine. At first he laughed them off, saying he trusted his wife. But at night, when the house grew quiet and the fire dimmed, the words returned, sharper than spears. A spirit lover. A woman ruled by her pen. A husband who did not see what she wrote. He began to wonder what truths she hid beneath her gentle smile. One night, long after the village had fallen asleep, he lay beside her, watching her chest rise and fall. He felt her peace like an insult. Slowly he rose, his movements careful not to wake her, and crossed to the hearth. The wooden box sat where it always did, half-shadowed as if waiting. He hesitated, then opened it. The faint scent of herbs and ink drifted upward. Inside lay the letters, dozens of them tied in small bundles, delicate as the wings of trapped birds. He untied one and began to read. At first the words were tender. She wrote of love, of gratitude for his strength, of the child she hoped would unite them. But as he read further, he found lines that pierced him. Words about loneliness, about the weight of silence, about the fire of truth hidden in ash. Even love, one line said, can wither when it is caged too long. Another read, he loves me but he does not see me. The hunter's heart turned to stone. To him each word was a wound. He imagined the villagers whispering over these letters, laughing at the proud Okoro whose wife pitied him. Rage rose like smoke in his chest. He read more, though the words blurred with his anger. Her wisdom mocked him. Her calm defied him. Her truth felt like rebellion. When Amara woke, she found him standing in the center of the hut, the letters in his hands. The look in his eyes froze her blood. Okoro, she whispered, clutching her belly. What are you doing? He did not answer. He walked to the fire, his breath sharp, his movements measured. You speak to spirits, he said. You write of things no wife should think. You hide your heart in ink and feed it to ghosts. She stepped forward, shaking her head. No, I write for us, for the life inside me, for the truth that keeps me whole. Truth? He hissed. A wife's truth should live in her husband's mouth, not in secret letters. Before she could reach him, he threw the letters into the flames. The fire caught quickly, crackling, devouring the edges of her words. Amara screamed, her voice breaking through the night like a bird struck mid-flight. She rushed to the hearth, trying to pull them back, but the heat licked her skin and drove her backward. Her words twisted in the fire, their inked lines curling into ash. The smoke rose thick and black, carrying faint whispers, as though the letters themselves were crying out. Okoro stood over the fire, chest heaving, his face hard and gleaming in the glow. Now your words are gone, he said. Now peace can live in this house. Amara fell to her knees, tears cutting lines through the soot on her cheeks. Her breath came shallow, trembling. The flames danced higher, and in them she saw shapes, letters turning to symbols, smoke forming faces. The spirits of her words were not dying, they were rising. Through her sobs she spoke softly, her voice like a prayer and a curse at once. You cannot burn truth, Okoro. It will burn you instead. He turned away, pretending not to hear, but the words clung to him, whispering in the air like invisible fire. The smell of smoke filled the hut, sharp and ancient, and the night outside grew strangely still. When the flames finally died, he stamped out the embers and went to bed without looking at her. Amara sat alone by the ashes, staring into the place where her words had lived. The air shimmered faintly as though something unseen still moved within it. She reached out and felt the heat, then opened the wooden box once more. Beneath the blackened lid, hidden deep under the lining of cloth, her fingers brushed paper, one folded letter untouched by flame. She pressed it to her heart and closed her eyes. The wind outside sighed through the cracks in the hut, carrying the faint scent of smoke and something else, something alive. The night held its breath and the fire, though gone, seemed to hum with the promise of return. Days passed, but the smell of burned paper lingered in the hut as if the fire still lived somewhere in the walls. Amara moved through the rooms like a shadow, speaking little, her once lively hands now trembling when they touched a pen or even a bowl. The villagers noticed she no longer sat by the window to write, that the soft scratching of her quill had vanished from the night air. They said the fire had tamed her, that the hunter had reclaimed his home. Yet under the silence something still breathed, a faint heartbeat of ink in memory that refused to die. One afternoon, as Amara lay weak on her mat, her belly swollen with the child that refused to let her sleep, a small servant girl named Kemi came to sweep the ashes from the hearth. Kemi was barely 12, a quiet orphan who had been brought to serve Amara after her marriage. She had watched the burning days ago, her wide eyes filling with tears as her mistress wept. Now, as she swept the ashes into a basket, something caught her eye, a thin edge of paper, blackened but unburned, half buried beneath a stone near the hearth. She hesitated, then reached down and pulled it free. It was a letter. The edges were charred, the surface smudged, but the writing inside was untouched. When Kemi held it to the light, the ink shimmered faintly, blue like moonlight reflected on water. It pulsed once beneath her fingertips and she gasped. It was warm as though alive. She looked toward Amara, who was asleep, then slipped the letter into her apron. That night, she hid it beneath her sleeping mat. When the moon rose, the letter began to glow. A faint shimmer spread across the woven floor, lighting the small hut with ghostly silver. Kemi trembled, whispering a prayer to the ancestors. Then, as she leaned close, she thought she heard a woman's voice, a whisper so soft it could have been the sound of breathing through leaves. "Keep me," it said, "for I remember what was lost." From that night onward, Kemi guarded the letter as one might guard a heartbeat. Meanwhile, Amara's strength waned. Her pregnancy weighed heavily on her, and Okoro, though proud of the child she carried, grew more controlling. He forbade her to write, even to speak of writing. "Your words brought this curse," he said whenever she asked for ink. "They angered the spirits. I will not have you summon them again." Amara obeyed in silence, but her eyes told stories her mouth could no longer form. Each night she lay awake, her hands moving over her belly as though tracing invisible words on her unborn child. She prayed that her daughter would be born with a voice no one could silence. The night of the birth came with thunder. The wind tore through the village, and the trees bent as if bowing to unseen power. Inside the hut, the fire flared blue, and Amara's cries echoed against the walls. When at last the storm broke, she held in her arms a daughter, small, strong, and silent. Okoro named her Nia, meaning purpose. He declared that she belonged to his house and his name, not to her mother's foolish dreams. "She will not hold a pen," he said. "She will learn the bow and the spear. My blood will teach her strength, not softness." Amara smiled faintly, though tears streaked her face. "Strength," she whispered, "does not come from silence." When Okoro left to tell the elders, Amara turned to the cradle. The baby's eyes, dark as night rivers, watched her with eerie calm. She felt an old power stirring again, the same that had guided her hand when she wrote. Weak as she was, she reached for a shard of charcoal from the cold fire pit. Her fingers shook as she tore a strip of cloth from her own robe. But no ink remained, and Okoro had hidden her pens. She looked around in desperation, then pressed her finger to her lips. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. With it she began to write, each letter trembling but alive. Her blood darkened the cloth, spelling words she could barely see in the candlelight. She wrote of truth that outlives flame, of voices buried and reborn, of the daughter whose breath carried her own broken dreams. Each stroke of her blood letter felt like a pulse leaving her body, a piece of her soul threading itself into the words. When she finished, she sealed it with her tears and folded it tight. Kemi entered quietly and found her sitting by the cradle, pale but serene. "Mistress," she whispered, "you should rest." Amara looked up, her eyes burning softly in the half-dark. "Kemi," she said, "there is something you must keep safe. One letter lives still, one that should never burn." Kemi hesitated, then nodded. From beneath her apron, she drew the surviving letter, the one she had saved from the ashes. Amara smiled faintly when she saw it. "The spirits chose well," she said. She laid her bloody letter atop it, pressing the two together. For a moment the air shimmered, and the paper beneath her hand glowed with a faint ember of light, as though the two had fused. Kemi stepped back in awe. The flame inside the folded page pulsed once, soft and red, before fading. Amara kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "If he burns one, another shall rise." for truth cannot drown in silence. By dawn she was too weak to rise. Okoro found her asleep beside the cradle and said nothing of the papers scattered around her. He gathered them roughly, not noticing that the letter Kemi had hidden again beneath the hearth was different now, heavier, humming faintly like a living thing. When night returned, the moon shone through the hut's window. Its light fell across the floor and touched the edge of the folded letter. For a heartbeat, it glowed again, a faint ember shimmering through the fibers of the paper, as if the fire that had once devoured her words had been captured within it. Somewhere outside, the wind sighed through the trees, carrying her name like smoke, Amara, Amara, until it faded into the distance. And in the quiet that followed, the letter pulsed once more, alive with everything she had ever written, everything she could never say, and everything the world had tried to burn away. The days grew longer, yet Amara's presence in the village seemed to shrink. Okoro, once proud of his wife's brilliance, had begun to see her as a threat, a flickering shadow of independence that could not be tamed. He forbade her from speaking with anyone outside the hut, forbade her from tending the small garden she loved, even forbade her from sitting by the river where she had first learned to write. Slowly, the village began to forget her laughter, the melody that had once mingled with the song of the river and the wind through the reeds. Inside the hut, Amara became a ghost of herself. Her hands, once alive with ink, rested idle, her eyes dim but still observant. She watched Okoro's face daily, saw his pride, his impatience, his greed, and whispered silent prayers for the child growing within her. Nia, their daughter, still an infant, gurgled softly in her cradle, unaware of the tension threading the air around her. Amara loved her fiercely but knew that Okoro's control would not easily release them. Storm clouds gathered one evening, dark and swollen, and the wind beat against the hut as if the sky itself were enraged. Lightning flashed across the river, illuminating Okoro's face twisted in impatience. He scolded her again for asking to step outside for air, calling her petitions foolish. Amara said nothing, her gaze fixed on the tiny bundle of life beside her. She whispered to Nia, "The world is cruel, but truth cannot be caged forever." That night, as thunder shook the village, the storm raged with a fury no one had seen for years. Villagers later swore they saw a lone figure walking along the riverbank, carried by the wind and rain. Amara vanished in the tempest, swallowed by the churning waters, leaving behind only a small bracelet, its intricate beads glinting faintly against the mud. Some whispered that she had been drowned by the river itself. Others, more fearful of the truth, said she had simply walked into the storm to escape the chains of her husband. Okoro, seizing the opportunity, told the village that she had left in shame, disgraced by her own folly and the rumors that had circulated about her supposed correspondence with spirits. He raised Nia alone, filling the girl's days with stories of obedience and strength, leaving out the warmth and wisdom her mother had once nurtured in her. Every question about Amara was met with silence or scorn. The village came to believe she had vanished because of her own arrogance, and gradually the memory of her laughter and kindness faded, like smoke dispersing into the wind. Yet that night, in the very hut where Okoro had celebrated his triumph, something strange occurred. The fire he had left smoldering in the hearth, thought long dead, ignited suddenly. Sparks danced into the air, and one tiny ember drifted toward the corner where Kemi had hidden the surviving letter. To Okoro's eyes, it seemed harmless at first, just a flicker of heat. But when it touched the folded paper, it did not burn. The letter remained intact, glowing faintly as if alive, humming softly under the moonlight that poured through the window. Kemi, standing silently in the shadows, clutched the letter to her chest. She had waited for this moment, knowing that the power within it could not be extinguished. The surviving words of Amara, written in ink, in blood, in hope, had endured. Though Okoro controlled the story in the village, though he could raise Nia and shape the child's understanding of her mother, the letter remained a secret flame. It carried everything Amara had loved, everything she had feared, and everything she had fought to protect. Outside, the storm continued its relentless symphony, wind rattling roofs and rain hammering the earth. Inside, the fire pulsed, whispering of truths that could not be silenced and of a woman whose voice, though absent, would yet find a way to speak. That night, as Okoro slept unaware of the quiet power stirring beneath the embers, the letter gleamed faintly in the moonlight, a reminder that even in triumph, control could not defeat the endurance of truth. And somewhere in the shadows, Kemi whispered softly, "The story has not ended." 15 years had passed since the night of the storm, and the village had changed as much as it had remained the same. Thatched roofs were repaired and rebuilt, the riverbank had shifted with the seasons, and the fields stretched greener than ever. Nia, now a young woman of 15, moved among the villagers with a quiet strength that seemed to echo a legacy she barely understood. Her dark eyes, reflective as the river at dawn, held a mixture of curiosity and a restless yearning she could not explain. One afternoon, while exploring the old hut where her mother had once lived, Nia stumbled upon a loose floorboard near the hearth. Dust rose in pale clouds as she lifted it carefully, and beneath, a small bundle of parchment lay hidden. The edges were frayed, the paper discolored, but the moment her fingers brushed the top sheet, a faint shimmer appeared along the inked lines. The letters seemed to breathe, the words curling slightly as though alive, whispering softly, a voice almost carried on the wind, "I am watching you, my child." Nia's heart skipped a beat. She drew back, the sensation both frightening and comforting. The handwriting, elegant, deliberate, yet trembling with emotion, felt familiar as if it pulsed in her own veins. She clutched the letter close, and in that moment, the room seemed to grow warmer, the air thick with a subtle power she did not yet understand. Kemi, now an older woman, appeared in the doorway. Her hair was streaked with gray, her back bent slightly from years of labor, yet her eyes burned with a steady light. "You found it," she said softly, stepping closer. "I hoped the time would come when someone could read it. Someone with her blood." Nia turned to her, questions burning behind her gaze. Who is this? Why is it alive?" Kemi sighed, settling on a stool near the fire. "This is your mother's voice, Nia. 15 years ago she was silenced, her words burned by your father in rage. All were lost, except this one. I hid it that night, believing that the spirit of Amara lingered inside. She lives within these lines, watching over you, guiding you. Your mother never truly left." Nia's hands trembled as she opened the letter. The words shimmered faintly in the sunlight that filtered through the small window. The sentences seemed to rearrange themselves, curling toward her like smoke. She read aloud softly, "The world will try to silence you, but your voice is not yours alone. Guard it, nurture it, and it will guard you in return." Night fell, and as Nia slept, she began to dream vividly. Her mother appeared in every dream, standing by the river, her form surrounded by ashes that glowed like scattered stars. The river reflected her image, and in the water, Nia saw flashes of the letters she had found, burning faintly, untouched by time, shimmering with life. Each dream left a warm, tingling ache in her chest, a message she could not yet fully decipher. Meanwhile, Okoro had grown older, but age had not softened the pride or the shadowed hunger for control that had defined his life. Unbeknownst to him, the letter's presence began to ripple outward, subtle at first. One evening he told a minor lie to the villagers about a missing crop, claiming responsibility where it did not belong. Immediately, the lamp by his side flickered violently, its flame bending and twisting as though breathing. The walls of his hut seemed to smoke faintly, curling upward in thin, accusing spirals. The pattern repeated. Every false word he spoke, every exaggeration, every attempt to reshape the past in his favor, caused small fires to flare, lamps to sputter, smoke to drift unnaturally in his rooms. The villagers began to whisper, noticing the uncanny events, but none dared speak openly. Okoro, frustrated and fearful, blamed himself, claiming the winds and the unstable hearts were responsible. Yet deep inside he felt the quiet, relentless presence of something he could not control, the living truth of Amara's words, now carried by her daughter. Nia meanwhile became increasingly aware of the letter's power. When she held it near the fire, the flames would flicker gently, responding as if alive. When she read it aloud, her mother's voice seemed to echo faintly behind her words. Sometimes the ember-like shimmer leapt toward the ceiling and drifted down like soft ash, hovering briefly before settling. Nia could feel the energy within it stirring, a quiet insistence that the past could not remain buried. Kemi guided her gently, teaching her how to treat the letter with respect, how to read it without fear, and how to understand that it was more than paper and ink. It was a vessel for Amara's spirit, for every letter burned, every word silenced, every truth denied. "It is your legacy, child," Kemi said. "Through this you will see what your mother fought for. Through this, you will learn the power of speaking even when the world tells you to remain quiet." Over the following weeks, Nia began experimenting, holding the letter close and whispering her own thoughts, small truths, aloud. She discovered that each word she spoke near the letter made the flames dance differently, made smoke curl in intricate patterns across the ceiling. It was as though her voice, nurtured by her mother's enduring words, was shaping reality itself, revealing the invisible threads of honesty and deceit. Okoro noticed the change too, though he would not admit it to anyone. The fires were now more insistent, following him even outside the hut. A lie told casually to a traitor would make the hearth smoke suddenly. A boastful word about past exploits would trigger a flicker of fire on a nearby tree. He could not suppress it, could not ignore it. The power of the letter, of Amara's words alive through Nia, was slowly, steadily bending the world around him, revealing every falsehood in flames and smoke that spoke louder than any human accusation could. And as Nia slept each night, the dreams of her mother by the river returned, brighter and clearer. The ashes glowed like stars, the river shimmered with her mother's presence, and Nia began to understand that she was not just a witness, she was a guardian. The letter's words, alive and breathing, had chosen her. The inheritance was hers, and with it, the quiet promise that truth, though hidden or burned, could never be destroyed. The village had gathered once more beneath the sacred baobab tree, the air thick with the scents of incense, smoke, and freshly tilled earth. It was the season of remembrance, when elders, women, and children came together to honor the ancestors and speak truths that could no longer hide in shadow. Nia, now nearly 16, stood among the women, her eyes steady, her fingers brushing the edges of the letter she had guarded for so many years. The villagers murmured their excitement, unaware of the invisible thread that bound her mother's spirit to the ceremony. Okoro, once the proud hunter whose strength had demanded respect, now stood among the elders. His hair had silvered, his skin bore the lines of age and care, and his eyes, though sharp, carried a subtle flicker of unease that no one but he could recognize. The villagers looked to him for guidance, for wisdom, yet behind his calm facade, the fire of the past burned quietly, insistent and patient. He had grown accustomed to the small, unexplainable phenomena, the flicker of flames, the subtle smoke curling where no fire existed, but he had dismissed them as imagination, the whisperings of time and fatigue. The ritual began at twilight, with drums beating in rhythm to the heart of the earth, and the ceremonial fire ignited at the center of the clearing. The flames leapt eagerly, crackling, sending sparks high into the night sky. Nia approached cautiously, holding the letter close to her chest. She had never performed a ceremony of this magnitude, but something deep within her, the echo of her mother's courage, urged her forward. As she placed the letter near the base of the fire, the flames shifted unexpectedly. They burned blue, a cold, ethereal light that drew gasps from the villagers. The wind seemed to pause as if the very air held its breath. From the hearth, a soft hum rose, growing louder, almost like a chorus of whispered voices. Then, slowly, impossibly, the letter lifted into the air. It hovered, turning gently, its pages flickering as though alive, yet untouched by the heat of the fire. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed across the clearing, carried in the wind and in the crackle of the flames. "You burned me once. Now I burn your lies." The villagers froze, eyes wide with awe and fear. Children clutched their mothers' hands. Elders murmured prayers under their breaths. And Okoro, standing rigid in the center of the ceremony, felt his heart seize. The familiar hallucinations he had long dismissed as fatigue surged now, overpowering his senses. Through the blue smoke, he saw a face emerging, and it was hers, Amara. Her eyes, calm yet piercing, bore into his very soul. Her hair seemed to flow like ink across the night sky, and her presence exuded the quiet authority of one who had never truly left. The letter rotated slowly as if orchestrating the revelation, and from it truths began to spill into the air, revealed by fire and smoke that refused to be contained. Whispers of his infidelity floated first, each lie illuminated by sparks that danced across the villagers' eyes. Every betrayal, every secret misdeed, seemed to find its voice in the flames. Okoro's role in Amara's disappearance, the unspoken darkness he had hidden beneath pride, was revealed not by accusation but by the undeniable clarity of the smoke and the letter's presence. He fell to his knees, clutching at his face as visions assaulted him. Scenes he had tried to bury emerged vividly. Amara weeping by the hearth, letters consumed by fire, the young Kemi hiding the final surviving letter, the storms that had raged the night she vanished. Every lie he had told to shape the village's perception of events now turned against him. Each word became tangible in the air, written in fire above the fire pit, twisting and forming sentences that glowed bright and impossible to ignore. The villagers could read the words as if the fire itself had become a scribe. "You thought silence could erase what was written. You thought fear would hide the truth. A man's silence cannot bury a woman's truth." Gasps spread across the crowd. Nia stood still, holding the letter like a shield of light. She could feel her mother's spirit within the pages, guiding the flames, controlling the smoke, orchestrating justice with precision and quiet fury. The letter's pages seemed to breathe, each word alive, tracing letters in the air above the fire, forming a tapestry of honesty that no human could contest. Okoro, overwhelmed, trembled as his mind replayed every act of cruelty, every attempt to suppress the voices of women in his house and in the village. He tried to speak, to deny, to shift blame, but each syllable triggered sparks along the firewood, and smoke swirled around him in sharp, accusing arcs. Every attempt at deceit was punished by a physical manifestation of truth, fire that wrote, smoke that revealed, and a voice that spoke directly into his conscience. He fell forward onto the ground, hands shielding his face as hallucinations of Amara became increasingly vivid. Her gaze burned with authority, unwavering in its condemnation. The villagers stepped back instinctively, sensing the power of something far beyond mortal understanding. Children clung to their mothers, but even in fear, they could feel the righteousness of the spirit at work. Above the fire, the words continued to form, glowing against the night sky. A man's silence cannot bury a woman's truth. The phrase hung suspended, visible to all, resonating with a weight that pressed on every heart present. Okoro's face, once proud and commanding, now showed the raw terror of a man confronted with the consequences of a lifetime of lies. The ceremony that had begun as a ritual of remembrance became an unveiling of cosmic justice. The fire, guided by the letter, spoke with authority. The smoke, curling and twisting, traced the shape of a woman who had never truly left. And through it all, Nia realized that she was not merely a witness, she was an heir to the voice that had endured, a guardian of truth that refused to die. When the fire dimmed and the blue glow receded into embers, the letter settled gently back into Nia's hands, still warm, still alive. Okoro lay on the ground, shaken and broken, unable to hide from the revelations, unable to escape the judgment that had come not from man, but from the spirit of a woman whose words had survived every attempt to destroy them. The village, stunned into silence, finally exhaled, understanding for the first time that justice need not be wielded with swords or punishment. It came quietly, powerfully, through endurance, through memory, and through the letters of a woman whose voice could not be extinguished. The village was quiet the morning after the ritual, though the air still carried the faint scent of smoke and the lingering shimmer of truth. Okoro remained on his knees near the embers of the sacred fire, his body trembling, eyes wide with fear and shame. The villagers had dispersed cautiously, murmuring about the supernatural events they had witnessed, leaving only Nia and Kemi near the hearth, the surviving letter clutched firmly in Nia's hands. Okoro's voice was hoarse when he spoke, barely more than a whisper at first. I must tell the truth, he said, his hands shaking as he reached toward the glowing ashes that had fallen from the letter. The wind seemed to hold its breath, and even the animals of the village stayed still, as if aware that what was about to unfold transcended human fear. Nia stepped closer, her eyes steady and calm. Speak it, she said. The fire will not lie. He inhaled, choking back tears. I did not let her live that night. The storm. I pushed her into the river. She tried to leave, to escape me, to write freely. His voice cracked, the confession ripping free like a jagged wound. I drowned her myself. All of it, the letters, the silence, the lies, I thought I could erase her. I thought no one would ever know. The ashes from the surviving letter, faintly glowing from its own inner fire, drifted toward him like smoke seeking a target. They clung to his skin, tiny embers burning with a heat that was not ordinary fire. Marks appeared across his arms, his chest, his face, etched in shapes that twisted into letters and phrases. He cried out in agony as the truth literally branded him. The words of Amara's letters pressed themselves onto his flesh, leaving invisible ink that glimmered with a spectral light. The fire whispered, almost softly, in a voice only he could hear, "You tried to bury me. You tried to silence me. Now you carry my truth on your own skin." Okoro fell forward, crawling toward Nia. "Daughter, please, forgive me." His hands shook violently as he reached toward her, his pride and power shattered. He looked at the young woman who had inherited the courage of the mother he had destroyed, and his voice broke again. "I was a fool, a monster. I never deserved." Nia's gaze did not waver. She felt a strange sorrow for the man before her, but it was tempered with clarity, with the unshakable presence of the letter and the voice of her mother guiding her thoughts. She knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on the glowing letters that clung to his skin. "Forgiveness is not mine to give," she said, her voice steady, resonant. "It belongs to the voice you silenced." Okoro's body shivered violently as the words sank into him. The ashes pulsed, spreading along his arms and chest, as if the letters themselves were breathing into him the weight of every word, every loss, every truth that had once been denied. Pain and fire intertwined as he screamed, convulsing on the ground, unable to hide, unable to resist. The villagers, drawn by the sound, approached cautiously from a distance. They witnessed a horrifying spectacle: flames licking at nothing, smoke curling into shapes of a woman's face, letters glowing in the air and clinging to the man's body, writing the story of his sins across his flesh. It was as if the fire itself had become the instrument of judgment, carrying the truth of Amara's life into the world in a form too vivid to deny. Okoro gasped, each breath trembling, and he felt a searing heat climb through his lungs. The fire, both real and spectral, seemed to enter his chest, setting alight not just the air but the very essence of his being. He coughed violently, his voice catching in a mixture of smoke and anguish, until finally he fell silent, the fire of truth consuming him from within. Nia watched, tears streaming quietly down her cheeks. The horror of the scene was tempered by a solemn understanding. This was not vengeance in the mortal sense, not a punishment doled out by hands of flesh and blood. This was the awakening of justice, the reckoning of a life spent trying to suffocate truth, manifest in the very medium Amara had wielded in life. Kemi knelt beside Nia, her hands shaking slightly. "He has been judged," she whispered, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the remaining ashes. "By the fire, by her words, by the spirit that lives in the letters." The air was heavy with smoke, yet it carried a strange serenity. The embers from the surviving letter floated upward, forming faint shapes like stars before they slowly dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only a lingering warmth. The marks burned into Okoro's skin faded gradually as his life left him, yet the memory of the letters remained, imprinted on the earth and the hearts of those who had witnessed it. Nia lowered her gaze to the letter, still clutched in her hands. Its ember-like glow had dimmed slightly but remained alive, a pulse she could feel through her fingertips. The voice of her mother whispered faintly through the paper, a gentle reassurance: "Truth cannot be silenced. It will rise again even if ashes seem to cover it." The villagers, though silent, began to feel the weight of what had occurred. A story that had been hidden, silenced, and feared for 15 years had returned in its full force. The flames, the ashes, the letters, they were all proof that a woman's voice, even when thought destroyed, could never be truly buried. Nia stood slowly, lifting the letter so that its glow reflected off her face. She felt both grief and power coursing through her, a connection to a mother she had never truly known, yet who had lived within her words, her dreams, and the magic that now coursed in the village. Around her, the air shimmered faintly, the smoke and ashes drifting like the memory of every word Amara had ever written. And though Okoro's life had ended in fire and anguish, Nia knew the balance had been restored. Truth, once nearly extinguished, had risen through letters, through smoke, through ember and spirit. It had taken its due, and now, in the quiet that followed, the village could finally remember the voice that had never truly gone. The final whisper of the letter, faint but unmistakable, seemed to wrap around Nia like a cloak. "I am here. I never left. Speak, live, and remember." Years had passed since the night when the fire revealed all. The village had changed, but the scars of history, the memory of what had been silenced, still lingered in whispers and in quiet glances between the elders. Nia, now a young woman of 17, had grown into a presence both gentle and commanding. She carried herself with the grace of one who understood that voice was more than speech, it was power, memory, and legacy. The surviving letter, now safely preserved and still faintly pulsing with her mother's spirit, rested near her heart like a living talisman. Nia gathered the women of the village one morning beneath the baobab tree, where the air smelled of earth, sunlight, and the faint whisper of distant river water. Mothers, daughters, and girls just learning to walk among the reeds came forward, curious and reverent. Their hands brushed against one another as if sharing an unspoken pact, a legacy passed through the blood and courage of generations. Nia spoke quietly, yet every word carried the weight of years of silence and loss. "We have been silent too long," she said. "Our words have been hidden, our stories forgotten, our voices caged. But today we write, not to please anyone, not to hide, but to speak truth. For ourselves, for our mothers, for our daughters, and for the ancestors who watch." She handed a bundle of parchment and quills to the nearest girl, and soon every hand was poised over the paper. The women began to write slowly, deliberately. Some wrote of grief long buried, of mothers lost and fathers cruel. Some wrote of hope, dreams, and love. Others wrote warnings, prayers, and blessings for the children not yet born. Nia moved among them, her own hand trembling slightly as she began to inscribe her mother's story, the story of fire, truth, and survival. Once the letters were completed, the women brought them to a large fire built at the center of the gathering. Nia, holding the surviving letter in her hand, placed it atop the pile. The flames flickered, catching the wind and rising higher than they had in memory. Smoke spiraled upward, carrying the words with it, wrapping them around the village, sending them into the sky where they would reach the ancestors, where they would be seen, heard, and remembered. The women watched as the smoke danced against the fading light, twisting and curling like fingers of flame, each wisp carrying whispers of truth. Nia explained the ritual as it progressed. After burning, the ashes would be collected and mixed with seeds. Every season we will let our words grow in the earth, she said. Our truths will bloom not just in paper but in the life that comes after us. The first season's ashes and seeds were sown in a garden near the riverbank. When the rains arrived, the flowers that sprouted were unlike any the village had ever seen. Their petals curved upward like tongues of flame, red and gold catching the sunlight. Children ran through the garden, their laughter mingling with the scent of blossoms, and elders knelt, reverent, touching the petals as if they could feel the letters' stories beneath the surface of the soil.